Boom! Hey, how are you? I'm Thundercloud here. It's Chillin Tuesday here at the Australian Poetry Hall of Fame, washing away the garbage, leaving rainbows after rains. Hey, let's have some fun at Henry Lawson Poetry Games. On this 12th of March 2024, what's the weather tonight? It's 24 degrees in Gyra. Tomorrow we're heading for a top of 25 and it's currently 24, overnight 9. Yes, it's much cooler in Gyra. Gyra people are cool. Anyway, get on with the show. Let's acknowledge that we are broadcasting from banned by Kamilaroi traditional land. Acknowledge the continuing connection to the land of the elders past and present, and also acknowledge our veterans who sacrificed much for our Australian way of life and that we could live in peace here now as well. All right, tonight I'm going back to read a bit of Henry Lawson from 1892 that I had missed as I was reading through his stuff. And this one in particular interested me, Constable McCarthy's investigation. And I went looking for it because I got an email from someone who told me about the poem, and I had read it because of the last words, which is, heralds his triumphant entrance to the thunder halls of fame. This is a biographical poem about Henry Lawson and his sort of doings and goings on in Sydney and meetings with Constable McCarthy. And the twist is right at the end. Now I've got 3 really long poems from Henry Lawson to start off with, and this is the first one. But before I do anything, why don't you smash like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more wonderful poetry coming from the Australian Poetry Hall of Fame. Me, Thundercloud. All right, the other thing is, if anyone out there has got any poetry books by a poet, an Australian poet by the name of Mary Rattenbury, Rattenbury. She was born in the 1870s in, I think, Ipswich, and she did a lot of her poetry from North Queensland, the Capricornia area, Mount Morgan. She was published, and you can find some of her stuff in Trove, and she was sort of a contemporary of Henry Lawson. He was born in 1867, she was born not long after. At that time, they were really pushing for women to get the vote and also against the Republic. And you'll see here tonight, the last 3 poems that I'll do for Henry Lawson are very sort of anti-monarchy. And that's a lot to do with his mother, Louisa Lawson, who moved from the bush and bought a magazine called The Republic, so hence their anti-monarcha stance. And also she then also published another magazine called The Dawn, this is Louisa Lawson, Henry's mum, which was instrumental in women obtaining the vote in 1902 in New South Wales, making New South Wales one of the first places in the world for women to get the vote. And it's only recently, like one of the last, which was Saudi Arabia, has finally gotten women the vote. And so happy International Women's Day to all those women out there for the other day, and happy International Men's Day for all those men out there in November. So we're going to start with Constable McCarthy's investigations. There's a very interesting section here about the Vagrant Act too, and it's written in parenthesis in the poem. I had a bit of a run-in with the Vagrant Gaming and Other Offences Act of 1896 in Queensland when I was a 21-year-old, so I really kind of understand what Henry Lawson is talking about, but you'll get it when we get on. There's also a couple of places in this poem where I put on a Scottish accent like Constable McCarthy would have had. Constable McCarthy's Investigations by Henry Lawson. Most unpleasantly adjacent to the haunts of lower orders stood a terrace in the city when the current year began, in the middle house and lodgings for a single gentleman. Now, a singular observer could have seen but few attractions, whether in the house or missus or the notice in the street. But at last there came a lodger whose appearances and actions puzzled Constable McCarthy, the policeman on the beat. He, the single gent, was wasted almost to emaciation, and his features were the palest that McCarthy ever saw. And these indications pointing to a past of dissipation greatly strengthened the suspicions of the agent of the law. He, the lodger, hang the pronoun, seemed to like the stormy weather, when the elements in battle kept it up a little late. Yet he'd wander in the moonlight when the stars were close together, taking ghostly consolation in a visionary state. He would walk the streets at midnight when the Storm King raised his banner, walk without his old umbrella, wave his arms above his head, or he'd fold them tight and mutter in a wild, disjointed manner while the town was wrapped in slumber, and he should have been in bed. Said the constable on duty, "Sure, I wonder what his trade is." And the constable would watch him from the shadow of a wall. But he never picked a pocket, and he ne'er accosted ladies, and the constable was puzzled what to make of him at all. Now, McCarthy had arrested more than one notorious dodger. He had heard of men afflicted with the strangest kinds of fads, but he couldn't fix the station or the business of the lodger, who at times would chum with cadgers and at other times with cads. And the constable would often stand and wonder how the gory, shoulder stranger got his living, for he loafed the time away, and he often sought a hillock when the sun went down in glory, just as if he was a mourner at the burial of the day. Mac had noticed that the lodger did a mighty lot of smoking. He could stow away a long 'un, never winking, so he could. And McCarthy once at midnight came upon the lodger poking round suspicious about alleys where the common houses stood. Yet the constable had seen him in a class above suspicion, seen him welcomed with effusion by a dozen Tony gents, seen him driving in the buggy of a rising politician through the gateway of the member's Tony private residence. And the constable off duty had observed the lodger slipping down a lane to where the river opened on the ocean wide, where he'd stand for hours gazing at the distant anchor shipping, but he never took his coat off, so it wasn't suicide. For the constable had noticed that a man who's filled with loathing for his selfish fellow creatures and the evil things that be will, for some mysterious reason, shed a portion of his clothing ere he takes his first and final plunge into eternity. And McCarthy, once at midnight, be it said to his abasement, left his beat and climbed a railing of considerable height, just to watch the lodger's shadow on the curtain in his casement, while the little room was lighted in the listening hours of night. Now, at first, the shadow hinted that the substance sat inditing. Now it indicated toothache or the headache, and again, 'twould exaggerate the gestures of a dipsomaniac fighting those original conceptions of a whiskey-sodden brain. Then the constable, retreating, scratched his head and muttered, "Sorra, one of me can understand it, but I'll keep me eye on him. Devil take him and his tantrums, he's a lunatic, begorra. Or if he was up to mischief, he'd be sure to douse the glim." But McCarty wasn't easy, for he had a vague suspicion that a scheme was being plotted, and he thought the matter down till his mind was pretty certain that the business was sedition, and the man, in league with others, sought to overthrow the crown. But in spite of observation, Mac received no information and was forced to stay inactive, being puzzled for a charge. That the lodger was a madman seemed the only explanation, though the house would scarcely harbour such a lunatic at large. His appearance failed to warrant apprehension as a vagrant, though 'twas getting very shabby, as the constable could see. But McCarty, in the meantime, hoped to catch him in a flagrant breach of peace or the intent to commit a felony. Parenthesis. For digression there is leisure, and it is the writer's pleasure just to pause a while and ponder on a painful legal fact, being forced to say in sorrow and a line of doubtful measure that there's nothing so elastic as the cruel vagrant act. Now, McCarty knew his duty and was brave as any lion, but he dreaded being landed in an influential bog, as the chances were he would be if the man he had his eye on was a person of importance who was travelling incog. Want of sleep and over-worry seemed to tell upon McCarty. He was thirsty more than ever, but his appetite resigned. He was previously reckoned as a jolly chap and hearty, but the mystery was lying like a mountain on his mind. Though he tried his best, he couldn't get a hold upon the lodger, for the latter's antecedents were known to the police. They considered that the devil was a dark and artful dodger who was scheming under cover for the downfall of the peace. 'Twas a simple explanation, though McCarty didn't know it, which with half his penetration he might easily have seen, for the object of his dangerous suspicions was a poet who was not so widely famous as he thought he should have been. And the constable grew thinner till one morning, little dreaming of the sort of revelation that was leaping from its sheath, he alighted on some verses in the columns of the Freeman with the Christian name and surname of the lodger underneath. Now, McCarty and the poet are as brother is to brother, or at least as brothers should be, and they very often meet on the lonely block at midnight, and they wink at one another, disappearing down the byway of a shanty in the street. And the poet's name, you're asking? Well, the ground is very tender. You must wait until the public put the guilt upon the name, till a glorious sorrow drowning and perhaps a final bender heralds his triumphant entrance to the thunder halls of fame. And that was by Henry Lawson, first published in verses popular and humorous, Constable McCarthy's Investigations. And there you go, Henry. You are now in the THUNDERCLOUD'S Australian Poetry Hall of Fame, just as you predicted, like over 130 years ago, 132 years ago. Amazing, hey? You must have had a dream. Now the next one is also set in Sydney. It's called The Captain of the Push. And the captain of the push is sort of like a boss of a gang. As the night was falling slowly down on city, town and bush, from a slum in Jones's Alley sloped the captain of the push, and he scowled towards the north, and he scowled towards the south, and he hooked his little finger in the corner of his mouth, and his whistle, loud and shrill, woke the echoes of the rocks, and a dozen ghouls came sloping round the corners of the blocks. There was naught to rouse their anger, yet the oath that each one swore seemed less fit for publication than the one that went before. For they spoke the gutter language with the easy flow that comes only to the men whose childhood knew the brothels and the slums. Then they spat in turns and halted, and the one that came behind, spitting fiercely on the pavement, called on heaven to strike him blind. Let us first describe the captain, bottle-shouldered, pale and thin, for he was the beau ideal of a Sydney larrikin, and his hat was most suggestive of the city where we live, with the gallows tilt that no one save a larrikin can give. And the coat, a little shorter than the writer would desire, showed a more or less uncertain portion of his strange attire, that which tailors know as trousers, known by him as bloomin' bags, hanging loosely from the person swept with tattered ends, the flags. He had a pointed stern post to the boots that peeped below, which he laced up from the centre of the nail of his great toe, and he wore his shirt uncollared, and the tie correctly wrong, but I think his vest was shorter than should be in one so long. And the captain crooked his finger at a stranger on the curb, whom he qualified politely with an adjective and verb, and he begged the gory bleeders that they wouldn't interrupt till he gave an introduction. It was painfully abrupt. Here's the bleedin' push me covey, here's a something from the bush. Strike me dead, he wants to join us, said the captain of the push. Said the stranger, I'm nothing but a bushy and a dunce, but I read about the bleeders in the weekly gas bag once. Sitting lonely in the humpy when the winter wind began to whoosh, how I longed to share the dangers and the pleasures of the push. Gosh, I hate the swells and good uns. I could burn 'em in their bed. I am with you if you'll have me, and I'll break their blazing heads. Now look here, exclaimed the captain to the stranger from the bush. Now look here, suppose a fella was to spit upon the push. Would you lay him out and fetch him even if the traps were round? Would you lay him out and kick him to a jelly on the ground? Would you jump upon the nameless, kickle or cripple him, or both? Speak, or else I'll speak. The stranger answered, Michael only alive. Now look here, exclaimed the captain to the stranger from the bush. Now look here, suppose the bleeders let you come and join the push. Would you smash a bleeding bobby if you got the blank alone? Would you break a swallow chinky, split his garret with a stone? Would you have a mole who'll keep you, like to swear off work for good? Eh? Yes, my oath, replied the stranger. My colonial oath I would. Now look here, exclaimed the captain to the stranger from the bush. Now look here, before the bleeders let you come and join the push, you must prove that you're a blazer. You must prove that you have grit worthy of a gory bleeder. You must show your form a bit. Take a rock and smash that window. And the stranger, nothing loath, took a rock and smash, they muttered, my colonial oath. So they swore him in and found him sure of aim and light of heel, and his only fault, if any, lay in his excessive zeal. He was good at throwing metal, but we chronicle with pain that he jumped upon a victim, damaging the watch and chain. Ere the bleeders had secured him, yet the captain of the push swore a dozen oaths in favour of the stranger from the bush. Late next morning, the captain rising, hoarse and thirsty from his lair, called the newly feathered bleeder, but the stranger wasn't there. Quickly going through his pockets of his bloomin' bags, he learned that the stranger had been through him for his scruff his mole had earned. And the language that he muttered I should scarcely like to tell. Stars and notes of exclamation, blank and dash will do as well. In the night, the captain's signal woke the echoes of the rocks, brought the gory bleeders slopping through the shadows of the blocks, and they swore the stranger's action was a blood-escaping shame, while they waited for the nameless, but the nameless never came. And the bleeders soon forgot him, but the captain of the push still is laying round in ballast for the nameless from the bush. So there you go. Now the next one I've got for you is also from Verses Popular and Humorous, and it's Billy's Square Affair. Billy's Square Affair by Henry Lawson. Long Bill, the captain of the push, was tired of his estate and wished to change his life and win the love of something straight. 'Twas rumoured that the gory bees had heard the Long Bill declare that he would turn respectable and wed a square affair. He craved the kiss of innocence, his spirit longed to rise. The crimson streak, his faithful peace, grew hateful in his eyes. And though in her eternity the crimson streak was there, I grieve to state this crimson streak was not a square affair. He wanted clothes, a masher suit, he wanted boots and hat. His girl had earned a quid or two, he wouldn't part with that. And so he went to Brickfield Hill, and from a draper there he shook the proper kind of togs to fetch a square affair. Long Bill went to the barber's shop and had a shaven singe, and from his narrow forehead combed his darling Mabel fringe. Long Bill put a square cut, and he brushed his boots with care, and roved about the gardens till he mashed a square affair. She was a Tony servant girl from somewhere on the shore. She was dressed in style that suited Bill. He could not wish for more. While in her guileless presence he had ceased to chew or swear, he knew the kind of Baroque that can fetch a square affair. To thus desert his donna old was risky and a sin, and 'twould have served him right if she had caved his garret in. The gory bleeders thought it too, and warned him to take care in case the crimson streak got scent of Billy's square affair. The blank and space and stars, she yelled, the nameless crimson dash. I'll smash the blanky crimson, and I'll square affair I'll smash. In short, she drank and raved and shrieked and tore her crimson hair, and swore to murder Billy and to pound his square affair. And so, one summer evening, as the day was growing dim, she watched her bloke go out and foxed his square affair and him. That night the park was startled by the shrieks that rent the air. The streak had gone for Billy and for Billy's square affair. The gory push had foxed the streak, and they foxed her to the park. And they, of course, were close at hand to see the bleeding lark. A cop arrived in time to hear a gory bee declare, "Gor blame me, here's the red streak foul of Billy's square affair." And now Billy scowls about the rocks, his manly beauty marred, and Billy's girl upon her head is doing 6 months hard. And Billy's swivel eye is in a sling, his heart is in despair, in the Sydney hospital, and in the Sydney hospital lies Billy's square affair. Okay, so what events have we got coming up over the next few months at the Australian Poetry Hall of Fame? First of all, we've got Gwen Ashton coming on the 27th of March. It's a Wednesday night. Tickets are $20 and they're available from Try Booking. He's one of the best blues players in the world, and this is his Mojo Soul Tour, and he's coming here just to Guyra. He's also in the Australian Blues Hall of Fame, so check him out and check out tickets for him. Don't miss out on this one in a lifetime opportunity. Fiori Musicali, the Armadale Chamber Choir, is bringing Treasures from the Baroque here on Saturday the 6th of April. That's Easter Saturday at 3 p.m. and they'll be doing some wonderful chorale music, chamber music here. Tickets also available from Try Booking, and you'll see the link in the description below. Then on the 12th of April, we've got Songs from the Porch of Life with Pam Hatter and Jeff Paul coming all the way from up that way, Cuyahoga way in the Northern Rivers. So tickets for that are only $10 and $15. So that's a 12th of April. That's a bargain, that one. Golly, don't miss that one for sure. Don't miss any of them. As well as that, we've got a heat of the Australian Poetry Slam here in August, and I'm also running the Australian Poetry Film Contest and Festival, which you can check out on Film Freeway. If you're a poet or a filmmaker, or a poet who knows a filmmaker, or you've got a smartphone and you want to make a poem on your camera, well, you could do it that way on your phone as well. But check out filmfreeway.com/Australian Poetry Film Contest there, and the link is also in the description. And finally, the Australian Poetry Hall of Fame.com.au is our website, and we've got a shop there with brand new poetry hats. Yes, bush poet hats and slam poet hats. Just up there today, so check them out. They are extra cool, and I'll be putting more merchandise up there in the meantime. Also, you can donate to the Australian Poetry Hall of Fame via PayPal. You can also send Bitcoin and other kinds of cryptocurrency check out the links in the description below. Let's get on with a little bit more of Henry Lawson now, and I bet to get over to the correct page. Now, the final 3 poems that I'm doing of Henry Lawson tonight are kind of anti-monarchist, and they're very much reflective of his Republican stance. And he, along with his mother and many people at that time, were pushing for Australia to become a republic when federation was to happen. In fact, many people were pushing for the abolition of the states, to just have Australia as one nation and with smaller regions. Anyway, there's no local government in our constitution. But here we go. The first one here is called Wales the First, and this was published in the magazine Truth. A bloated prince of parasites, a libel on the past. We hail him as the coming king when kings are going fast. The end of England's royal line, and the last, perhaps and worst. We'll set him up on England's throne and call him Wales the First. I'd like to see that future. What changes will it bring? I think 'twill be a funny time when Wales the First is king. I wonder how the crown will suit the thick, fat head of Tummy. I wonder how he'll fit the throne where sits his royal mummy. I'd like to see him sitting there, for 'twould be royal sport, to see his bulgy eyes upon the ladies of the court. Oh, ladies of the fancy, fling out your legs and sing a royal tune for prostitutes when Wales the First is king. We cannot say he's gracious, and neither can we say the Prince of Wales is noble, for he isn't built that way. We cannot say he's much inspired with wisdom from above. As for love, we've had enough of England's royal love. His poet laureate must make another song to sing. The anthem will not fit the case when Wales the First is king. We're safe to hear the angels weep up there beyond the skies. We're right for songs of drivel when the selfish woman dies. But England's bards must buckle up and chase the muse around. They'll need their inspiration when the Prince of Wales is crowned. But king he mightn't be, perhaps the great might feel the sting of terrible democracy here when Wales the First is king. Interesting. And the next one, and then the final one, the next one's called When the Duke of Clarence Died. Let us sing in tear-choked numbers how the Duke of Clarence went, just to make a royal sorrow rather more preeminent. Ladies sighed and sobbed and drivelled, toadies spoke with bated breath, and the banners floating half-mast made a mockery of death. And they said Australia sorrowed for the prince's death. They lied. She had done with kings and princes ere the Duke of Clarence died. What's a death in lofty places? What's a noble birth, say I, to the poor who die in hundreds, as a man should never die? Can they shed a tear or sorrow for a royal dunce's fate? No, for royalty has taught them how to sing the songs of hate. Oh, the sounds of grief in Europe and the lands across the tide rose the growl of revolution when the Duke of Clarence died. It matters not how low our Auburn lives are spent, claim in common with the Clarence straight from Adam our descent. Even the man they call a bastard has a lineage to himself, though he traces not his fathers through the sordid line of Guelph. And perhaps in some foul garret, in his mystery and pride, one of nature's kings was dying when the Duke of Clarence died. Ah, the work girl's bloodless fingers in the plundered human hive, so the banners of rebellion while the kings and princes thrive. In the northern cold winter, in the south in dust and heat, weary workmen preach sedition at the corners of the street. They preeminent in sorrow, 'tis preeminence in cheek. We shall hear what care and pain is when the slums begin to speak. Hundreds starve to pay the shadow of a crown upon his head. Yellow gold at last impotent fought with death beside his bed. And perhaps a prince of nature sat despairing at the side of a noble mother starving when the Prince of Clarence died. Ignoble living, splendid dead, behold the pomp of royal woe. Lo, the funeral battle hero never was buried so. What and who was he? What has he done to benefit mankind? Has he naught to show St. Peter save a royal race behind? Who is worthy, who is noble? God shall gold alone decide? Better men like dogs were buried ere the Duke of Clarence died. Thrones of earthy and earth rulers soon shall be swept aside, and 'twere better for his comfort that the Duke of Clarence died. First published also in The Truth. And the final Henry Lawson one I've got for you tonight is called The English Queen, a Birthday Ode. There's an ordinary woman whom the English call the Queen. They keep her in a palace and I worship her. I ween she's served as one whom is owned a nation's gratitude. May angels keep the sainted sire of her angelic brood. To the people must be blind, I think, or else they're very green, to keep the dull old woman whom the English call the Queen, whom the English call the Queen, whom the English call the Queen, that ordinary woman who the English call the Queen. The Queen has reigned for 50 years and 5, and scarcely done a kindly turn to anyone alive. It can be said, and it is said in scorn, that the poor are starved the same as on the day when she was born. Yet she is praised and worshipped more than God has ever been, that ordinary woman whom the English call the Queen, whom the English call the Queen, whom the English call the Queen. That cold and selfish woman whom the English call the Queen. The Queen has lived for 70 years and 3, and few have ever lived a flatter life, more useless life than she. She never said a clever thing or wrote a clever line. She never did a noble deed in coming times to shine. And yet we read, and still we read in every magazine, the praises of the woman that the English call a Queen, whom the English call a Queen, whom the English call a Queen, that dull and brainless woman whom the English call a Queen. They say that she's gracious and she's inspired with love. They also say that she's inspired with wisdom from above. They say that she's a noble queen and can do nothing wrong. They call on God to bless her and they hope she'll reign for long. And where her foot has never trod, her heart has never been, there's many a statue raised to her whom English call the Queen. Whom English call the Queen, whom English call the Queen, that fat and selfish person whom the English call the Queen. She's lived a virtuous life, 'tis true, but then there's nothing in the useless life of one who's ne'er had enough heart to sin. She's lived a blameless life, they say. She thinks it's not a crime to take her thousands while the poor are starving half the time. And when they blow the final trump, we rather think Faustine will stand as good a show as she whom the English call the Queen. Whom the English call the Queen, whom the English call the Queen. Like pure and selfish woman, whom the English call the Queen. The Prince of Wales is worshipped next. It is a funny thing, for he will be the loafer whom the fools will call the King. They keep the children of the Queen, and they are not a few, the children of the Queen and all her children's children too. The little great-grandchild is great because the nation's green, and grandma's the person whom the English call the Queen. Whom the English call the Queen, whom the English call the Queen, the dull and yet gilded dummy who the English call the Queen. And yet, yearly, on the Queen's birthday, they praise her and rejoice, and even far across the sea is heard a toadie's voice. They gammon Christianity, they go to church and pray, yet thrust her in the sight of God, an idol of today. She's praised and worshipped more than God has ever been, that ordinary woman whom the English call the Queen, whom the English call the Queen, whom the English call the Queen, that selfish, callous woman whom the English call the Queen. And that's the end of it. It was first published in The Truth, and that was written by Henry Lawson. He really didn't like the Queen. That would have been Queen Victoria. Obviously, he didn't like her at all. No. Certainly not Lee. All right, well, look, that's all I've got for Henry Lawson tonight, but I do have one more poem for you that I wrote myself, sitting out on the grass, and it's called SLUCK. SLUCK. It's a new thing and it's called SLUCK. You can buy it by the gram, the kilo, or the ton. It's gacky, gunky, orange, coloured gunge, pukey, smelly muck. But it's only for the best, as it's not for anyone. With a bit of Bitcoin, I'll sell you SLUCK. But you need to prove you're not a robot. It's delivered in an armoured, lead-lined truck, in a box with a red ribbon in a bow knot. It has many uses, but most often SLUCK is used to grease luxury cars. Its second and important use, lube for a duck, and releasing stuck clips on bras. Don't miss this opportunity to buy SLUCK. It won't last and will be sold out. But order straight away and you will have luck. You will love my SLUCK, no doubt. And if you like that, quick, give it a thumbs up. Yeah? Okay, SLUCK. And I didn't even have to rhyme the F word with it. How about that? Are you impressed? You should be, because I could have. All right. Okay, so that's it from the Australian Poetry Hall of Fame tonight. Check out also the Film Freeway, the Australian Poetry Film Festival. That's coming up, and film competition. It's amazing, and it's the second year, and there's some great entries in it too. So get your entries in. If you're a filmmaker or a poet who knows a filmmaker, or vice versa, or you just got a smartphone and you want to make a video of your poem, you can send it into the Australian Film Contest, and you might even win or be featured. Yes, that's right. Yes, so check it out. Everything's in the links below. I'm Thundercloud, washing away the garbage, leaving rainbows after rains. Thank you. Big thanks to Henry Lawson tonight, and a big thanks. Check out SLUCK. Get some SLUCK. You be in luck. See you later. Boom.